publishers.
Right.
No, with the rise of self-publishing, they basically were able to tell their own stories and make them available to the public, and very successfully, because a lot of them, were amazing writers who just had not been given the opportunity by traditional publishing. And I think that there's been a certain amount of push as the years go by. Traditional publishers, first of all, want some of that, like some of that success that some of those authors have found. And also, I think there has been a social justice component of looking at the sort of authors and books that traditional publishers accept and publish, and trying to push for greater diversity within traditionally published romance. I mean, self-published is sort of a somewhat different thing. But I would think the rise of self-publishing and I think consent issues are two of the huge changes over the past, several decades that have occurred.
I concur. That has actually been one of the I think one of the we had our first book club last week, last Sunday, and one of the first things those of us who had been reading romance for at least 2 decades have talked about right off the bat was like, oh, there's consent here. In the particular book we read, The Trouble with Hating You by Sajni Patel. There is a highlighting Indian culture. So there was like, this isn't something that I would have found 20 years ago. There was, like you were saying, there was a lot of talk about consent. And even with these characters who are very dynamic and flirtatious and really engaged with each other, they're still able to talk about, do you actually want this to happen in a romantic way? And I did go back actually last year and read some of the books that I got me into romance, and I was like, ooh, oh, I do remember that. Yep. Yeah, I remember that. I didn't feel the way it feels right now, but I really, yeah, that's not. I don't know how I feel about that now. Yeah. So you really, yeah, I really identify with that. So watching that happen, being like, oh, okay, there's a way to do this.
Right.
There's a way to do that.
I mean, enthusiastic consent is sexy. Like, do you really want a partner you sort of have to drag into and convince that you really want to be intimate with them? Like, you want someone who enthusiastically wants to be intimate with you. And if you can't make, tell me what you like, tell me what you want sexy, then I don't know what to tell you, because there was nothing non-sexy about consent. So to me, at least.
Yeah. You've definitely managed to do that in all the fields. Yes, friends, you should definitely check it out. Obviously, we want you to pick up the book at Midtown Reader over on 1123 Thomasville Road in Tallahassee, Florida, because the conversations there around what our characters want, what Alex and Lauren want, are sexy. It's exciting to read, and you're excited for the characters about what they're about to step into and where their relationship is going and the feelings that they're feeling. And that doesn't detract, like that. Being able to discuss those things ahead of time doesn't take away at all from the sweetness of the moments, the spiciness of the moment. So how did you get your start as a romance writer? What kind of led you into it?
I can't actually sort of pinpoint my thought process in that moment. In 2014, I was working part-time at the library, and I was also going through sort of a rough patch emotionally. I was depressed. And I think that part of what happened was that I come from an academic background. So I had done a lot of, I was in a history PhD program. I left before doing my dissertation, but I had done a lot of academic writing, which I had loved. And I think there's a part of me that just really deeply missed research, that had deeply missed writing. And I sat down someday in 2014 and I wrote a scene that was set in a library, and it wasn't me and it wasn't a full book, but it was it was pleasurable to me. And I think part of it was that it was using those parts of my skill set in my brain that I had not been able to use for a while. I mean, part of it was because I was depressed, because there is something very freeing. If like your head is not a great place to be, one way to sort of escape your head is to read someone else's book, which is, a classic thing that I've done my entire life. But another thing that you can do is actually write someone's book. Because if you're in someone else's point of view in their head and sort of writing what's happening to them, it's like clearing your brain of whatever is happening with you while you concentrate on them. And that was really a wonderful sort of escape for me as well. I came out of it feeling better. And so that's where I began. And then I read a full-length book without plotting it out ahead of time, which was very clear. So that book will never see the light of day. And then my goal for the next book after, I wrote a novella. My goal was to have a plot. So I did that. And that one actually got published, which is in retrospect kind of a shame because it probably should not have been published. It's not by far my strongest work. It's out of print now, that whole series. I kind of learned to write as I was writing that series. And unfortunately, it was kind of in the public, although not that much in the public because it didn't sell that many copies. So.
I'm always interested to hear like what is the inciting event for a romance writer? I mean, I love that question for writers, period. But I think there's such like a common experience of reading romance. It's something I found that I can like bring in conversations and people can really relate to. It's like a really good jumping off point. Like, who did you read first? Like, what was your first romance novel? And so hearing that conversation among like romance writers, what was your first romance novel? What made you do it? What made you say, you know what, today's the day. We're just gonna put all the words on the paper. I really love hearing that. Thank you for sharing. So fandom plays a huge role in the spoiler alert series. I mean, that's part of where we get the term spoiler alert from, right? It's like, oh, okay, we're talking about our show. Hold on, guys, I have information. If you don't want to know, the moment is now. Look away. Um, so, what has been your experience with fandom and romance? Like, what made you say, you know what, let's make this a central like cultural experience for all of these characters.
I would say that although my experience in fanfic was more recent, where I started reading in 2000, maybe 17, 18, my experience as a shipper, like someone who watches shows and movies primarily to like ship the people involved, that is lifelong, well before there was actually the term shipper, which was with X-Files. And X-Files actually was one of my earlier ships with Mulder and Scully. But I mean, even when I was watching, I've said this before, when I was in elementary, middle school, I watched Days of Our Lives. And there was a couple that for whatever reason I was super into, which I found out later apparently started with an assault, but I didn't know that at the time. At the time, it was, very romantic. It was Jack and Jennifer. And I was so into it. And again, I'm 45, so this is like 80s. That I recorded on VHS every episode of Days of Our Lives, but then I hooked up two VCRs together and then made a supercut on a different VHS tape of all the Jack and Jennifer scenes that I loved. So like basically, when you see a fan supercut on YouTube that they did digitally, I did that with my VHS tapes. It took forever.
Oh my gosh. Does this VHS still exist?
No, it was commitment. Like, that was commitment. And like I drew a picture of him, like I paused the TV at one point. I thought he looked particularly attractive. And I actually like sketched him, like drew a decent, because I used to draw people at the time. So like there was fan art involved, and I didn't have the terms for any of that, but that's sort of been part of my experience, for almost all my life. fanfic itself, I didn't really get into till several years ago. I didn't even realize, frankly, that it existed. And it's actually probably for the best that I did not know, because if I had known that X-Files fanfic existed, I probably would not have graduated from college. So it's better. It's better that I waited.
No, like engaging in like fandom behavior. Like I guess we name things after the fact anyway, but engaging in like fanish behavior before you even have terms for it, I really relate to that. I think my first fandom was definitely Batman. I grew up in my parents were really big sci-fi nerds, so X-Files, Batman, like if it was on TV and it was like comic related or science fiction related or murder mystery related, we were watching it.
Mhm.
But I think the first real, so of course, classic ship, Bruce and Selena, Batman, Catwoman, you know. But I think the first one where I started writing a story where I was like, I don't know, I want more of these characters. I'm going to write my own thing that happens with them. It was definitely after having read a romance novel.
Mhm.
And I wrote, it was Voltron, which is old classic 80s anime, one of the
Mhm.
first to really come over and really be really popular on Cartoon Network. And I wrote, I think it was Relena and Keith
Mhm.
fanfic. And it was just a story that I wrote. And I was like, I don't know, I just want more of them. And I remember my mom finding it and definitely being like, how do you know these whatever? Because I was definitely using like old school romance terminology. Because it was after I'd read my first romance novel. She was like, warming his bed. What is that? I was like, and we won't go into how I explained it, but I definitely used some like history nerd terminology to throw her off the scent. But yeah, I don't know, that thing where you just see a pairing and you're like, I want them, I want them to be together. I think they work, and I want to
Mhm.
write about that. It's such a before you even really have friends or terminology for it. It's so relatable. So getting to all the feels. I loved spoiler alert. I definitely, when I heard all the feel, and I read it right before all the feels was coming out, so I was ready for it. I was like, yes, I love this. For fanfic writers falling in love with like all kinds of celebrity nonsense happening around it, I want more of this. Um, so I read all the feels, and that I feel like that is the book that kind of really got me. That is my spoiler alert book. Um, and so it's about Lauren and Alex. Alex is a actor on this extremely famous uh, Game of Thrones esque television series. Um, and he's kind of he has the perception of being the bad boy of the cast, and Lauren is brought on to basically be a minder for him. And I'm actually going to let you tell a little bit more of the plot and kind of where this. I think our participants know where this is going because it's a romance.
Well, I can tell you that minders are a real thing that happens. In fact, I know Robert Downey Jr. had at least a couple of them, and he actually married one of them.
See?
So basically, all the feels is just like nonfiction. No, it's not
Not here.
nonfiction,
There's no
but
person.
but it happens.
Yeah.
And so Alex is again has a reputation of being not as just out of control. Like there
Yeah.
is, but a lot of that is because he hates how the final season of his show is for a variety of reasons, some of which you find out later in the book why it's so personal to him. And he also has ADHD. And so, like, impulsivity is something that he struggles with some of the time. And he's also just part of the reason the name of the book is All the Feels is because Alex is completely unafraid to feel his emotions. Like, he can be angry or sad or joyful or enthusiastic or curious. He doesn't try to hide any of that. He is exactly who he is at all times, which is really, I think, if you're depending on who you are, could be very tiring. But Lauren, who is his minder, who is sort of a burned out former ER therapist. She's someone who, if people were coming into the emergency room and for a mental health crisis or for potential mental health crisis or substance abuse, then she needs to sort of do triage and sort of figure out what's happening and try to get them the support that they need as best she can within that setting, which often is not as much as one would hope would be, as much help as you would hope would be available. So she's burnt out from that. And she's also used to sort of metaphorically making herself small, in the sense that sort of taking up as little sort of room in other people's lives as possible, like putting herself last. And part of what is so good about her relationship with Alex is that he pushes her to like express herself and to say what she likes and what she doesn't like, and sort of refuses to let her be in the background of her own life anymore. And so they're a wonderful pairing because she provides him with, I think, the steadiness that he needs and caring that he needs, and it's sort of understanding. And then he cares about her so much with everything that's in him that he is not willing to let her sort of be in the background of other people's lives or his life or her own life. And I think it's really, I love that story. So I'm glad that you love it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that, well, honestly, lots of people can relate to, right? Like feeling small or feeling like you have to make yourself small. But I think especially, fat folks, we know, like if you want to fit into society, if you want to be treated well, if you're want to make things easier for other people, if that's, a value you have, even in caring for other people, then
Mhm.
making yourself small, putting yourself last, kind of shrinking in public is definitely something that's relatable. And so that definitely just hit. I was like, oh yeah, I needed this one. I needed this one. Um, I think you also did a really excellent job with what her job is. She could easily become Alex's caretaker in a way that's like overextended and kind of puts her back in the place of
Mhm.
herself in the background. And the way you kind of navigated their relationship, and I won't give too many spoilers. We're trying to keep it spoiler free as possible. Um, but the way you really navigated writing their relationship in a way that avoided that, where she cares for him, he cares for her, they take care of each other, they really, provide support for each other. But because because he understands how to make accommodations for his ADHD for the most part,
Mhm.
and has the ability financially to kind of take care of most of that himself already. And emotionally, with that, like, final emotional like moment or confrontation that
Mhm.
really helps him understand what he wants and who he wants and what he deserves as well. It would be easy for her to be the one to carry him through that, and she's actually not there. She's actually dealing with her own crisis, and that was really gratifying to me because it would be easy for her to be the person coaching him through that moment, and she wasn't, and that was actually good. So I
Right.
really appreciated that.
Yeah, I didn't want to put her in the position of being his caretaker. Like she deserves to be cared for, and he does in his own in his own Alex way.
Wow.
He is he is doing his best to care for her,
Mhm.
and sort of find out what she likes and then give it to her. Even though she's not used to sort of saying what she likes, he's paying attention and taking care of her in his way as well, which she needs and hasn't had.
Yeah. Like, the beauty of romance. Oh my gosh. I also have really loved because this is part of the reason why I love a series like a friend group series is you get to see all of these different friends with hold on, with Marcus and April. And in this book, we get to see Siona, and I don't know, just this like community of people. And that is a little bit of the theme of Shipwrecked. I have gotten to read it because I got that special arc. Kind of what is your approach to writing a friend group or writing multiple people or having all these personalities that play off of each other? How do you like, I don't know, how do you envision that or develop that? Or what's the balance even between books?
Unless unless part of the character's actual arc is sort of finding a community, which I think is part of Peter's arc, he is
Yeah.
quite isolated at the beginning of the book. But unless that's part of the arc of the character, I never want my characters to be entirely isolated. I never want I want them to find love, but for me, that's not enough for a happy ending because things happen, and I feel like you can love your partner with everything in you, but you still need more to your life than that. And so, like, I try to make sure they're friends or they're a family, depending on what's happening. So it's important to me that there be secondary characters sort of in their lives, if at all possible, because I want to make sure that by the end of the book that I feel good about where they are in their lives and that they will be happy both in and out of their relationship. So that's important to me. I mean, the fun part about writing these intertwined sort of books is that you get to sort of revisit these side characters repeatedly over the course of the books. And that's one of the real joys for me. One of my favorite parts in the series that I'm going to really just deeply miss writing are the cast chats,
Yeah.
where basically they're all there, and and just writing them because I find them, like, I just found them deeply entertaining to write. So I'm gonna miss that. And it's a balancing act with making sure that you have side characters and that it feels like a rich world, that it's not just this, even though they're on this island for 6 years, they have a crew there, you know.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure they're not living in sort of this weird bubble, that feels like a version of life. Obviously not exactly like life, but a version of life. And that
Yeah.
means you got to have other people around you, and you might as well make them entertaining.
Yeah.
uh, and also, found family is one of my favorite things in romances. It's one of my favorite things to write. And really, the beauty of writing the cast of the Gods of the Gate show was served to provide a found family for a lot of the people within the cast.
Um, that's right. I had a question, like a really fun cast question. Let's see if I can. So just to remind our participants, so the center of this series is this Gods of the Gates television show. All of our heroes, our actors that run this show, are in Shipwreck, the book that comes out in November. It's Peter and Maria, who are both actors, and they've been isolated on this island for this whole time, and they meet I don't know, they're speaking of enthusiastic consent, their first meeting was wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Okay. So the book, and this is not a spoiler because this is all chapter one,
Right.
is Maria is Swedish, and she kind of on a lark applies, is going for one of these roles on Gods of the Gates, the second season. And she comes to LA for sort of a final round of auditions, which is something that happens where they're down to about, maybe 2 or 3 people for a main part. And then they have chemistry auditions. So they put you against either someone who's already in the cast or maybe other finalists for a different part. And then you play off of each other and see how is the chemistry. These people, particularly if it's when people are supposed to be romantically involved, are going to be working together a lot. Is there any spark? So she comes and meets at a sauna, an LA sauna, meets an actor named Peter, whom she immediately finds very hot. Maria is quite pragmatic in that she does not see any future with Peter whatsoever, because if she does not get the part, she's going to be going back to Sweden, right? If she does get the part, it's she would be the female half of a couple that's stranded on a desolate Irish island for what probably is going to be years at a time. So there's just no way that she's going to be around this dude ever again. So they have a one night stand and she hits it and quits it and leaves him in the basically before he wakes up the next morning with no contact information. He doesn't even know her last name. He doesn't know that she's an actor. And then of course they show up at the audition and he's he's the other person that she's going to, one of the people that she's going to be doing a chemistry audition with, and they get cast and go to this remote island for 6 years together, even though he's like really unhappy because she left him that way. And when I first wrote the beginning of the book, I wrote the whole scene from the sauna. I wrote them seeing each other for the first time in the sauna, and I wrote the entire sex scene, like in the first chapter. But I mean, I have no issues with sex scenes for the sake of sex scenes, right? But to me, it just felt kind of hollow because I had no emotional connection to them at that point. Readers weren't going to have an emotional connection to that point. So even if it was a little hot, there was no emotional resonance for me. And so I was like, this isn't working for me. And then I remembered there have been a couple books that I had remembered that had started sort of toward the end of the sex scene, like first sentence, like toward the end of the sex scene. There's an old Jane Ann Krentz from like the early 1990s. It was like a Harlequin temptation called Lady's Choice. And it starts in the middle, sort of 3/4 of the way through the sex scene. I think there's at least some others too, but it's not, doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. And I thought, well, I mean, why not? So we start at the very end, but it is still happening, of their sex scene. So from page 1, it is as Brittany from Love Sweet Arrow, whom I adore, said, it is a slow burn that bangs on the first page. So you start out with the first page, they are in the middle of their first intimate scene. But then after that, it's a slow burn. But I'm like, well, let's do it. I mean, they're doing it. So I'll do it.
It's such a tease because you're like, oh, okay, this is how we're starting. And then you're like, wait, oh no. Oh no. And I cannot wait for the rest of our book club to hear their response to that. Later in the story, you do have Maria and Peter, both of whom are fat characters. They're actors, they're in the industry, they're professionals, they're hard workers, but they're still facing, they're on this like blockbuster series. But even still, towards the end of their role on that series, they face some discrimination as fat actors. And you handle that really well. And I just wanted to know about like your research about like the behind the scenes for fat folks in entertainment. Like what was your research on that like?
Well, I mean, I think some of it is just paying attention because, fat representation in all sorts of media is something that has been of interest to me for a long time. I also have, a friend who used to work in Hollywood, so I could chat with her some about that. And you can read a little bit, if you read interviews with larger actors, you kind of get a sense of how things are, the areas in which there can be difficulties. Shipwrecked is probably of the 3 books the least about issues of fatness, I would say, but it does come up. And I will tell you, part of the reason it comes up at all is because I was determined to have a fat male lead as well as a fat female lead. And as I had written the showrunners, Ron and RJ, there is no way that they would cast 2 fat characters, like 2 fat actors, if there wasn't some reason that they were casting without like giving it all away. I was like, I have to come up with a plausible reason that, because they just wouldn't, like, it would overthrow the characters that I created. So I'm like, and I was like, no, that makes sense, that would be why they would do it. And then we had to sort of move on from there. But that's why I kind of the issue kind of comes up really at all, because I had to figure out a way to make that make sense.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. But yeah, a lot of it is me sort of watching. A lot of it is my friend, and then a lot of it is again reading interviews with some of these actors and sort of seeing what they say about their careers and their lives in Hollywood as larger actors.
Maria is like no holds barred. She doesn't care. She's out here. She loves herself. She's hot. She knows. If you don't know, then you're blind. I that was just so fun to read. Um, I don't know. Can you tell us a little more about Maria, like how your I don't know her character and where she
Right.
came?
One of my goals in my books is to write a lot of everyone. Being fat is not a monolithic experience. People who are fat have different relationships with their fatness and with their bodies, right? So for April, and spoiler alert, she loves her body, but has some insecurity still because of her family history. And her big thing is not to learn to love herself, because she already does. It's to sort of impose boundaries in her life, particularly with people, loved ones, around the issues of fat shaming and so forth. But it's not because she doesn't love herself. For Lauren, her people's reactions to her fatness is part of sort of her larger issues with sort of trying to make herself smaller, metaphorically, but also like there's a scene on a plane where she's physically trying to make herself smaller. And so for her to be willing to take up space and demand like the sort of treatment that she deserves is part of that. And then I wanted to make sure that there was someone where their fatness was not an issue for them at all. Like, because for me, I want to have part of the beauty of writing lots of fat characters is that you can explore sort of the range of people's different experiences with their bodies and their relationships to their bodies. So yeah, I wanted someone who's like, Maria does not, is this, do you, no swearing? Is it PG or is it?
PG-13.
Maria does not give an F. So, like, so she has her vulnerabilities have nothing to do with her body. And in fact, part of what the dynamic with the showrunners that was so interesting is that because the people that I've sort of described them as, they would assume that women were vulnerable because of like body image. And so they sort of use that sort of as a tact to sort of get Maria to back down. And she ain't backing down because she has no, like, that is not a tactic that works on her. It does not like bother her at all. And that was
Honestly, she is the one who's more vulnerable in that moment to
mhm.
that.
And part of that is cultural. Like one of the main conflicts between Maria and Peter is what they're willing to do for their career.
Yeah.
What exactly are they willing to do? And some of it is personality, but a lot of it is cultural. It is different to be, I live in Sweden now, but I'm American. It is different when you have a much more of a social safety net beneath you. If you were unemployed, there's a big difference there. um, Swedes typically, at least traditionally, don't bring the work home with them in the same way Americans do. Like the workday is done, it's done. Is Americans are much more available to employers, in part because employers expect them to be available, but for much larger periods of time, there is a cultural, the cultural identities that come with the issue of work. And so part of the conflict there is about what Peter is and isn't willing to do for this, what may be a role of a lifetime, particularly for someone who's been a character actor for a long time, because he is fat, even though, a very attractive man, so forth. But there aren't a ton of roles that don't, for fat actors, that don't revolve around fatness, or that are lead roles that don't revolve around fatness if the actor is fat. So he's like, this role has nothing to do with my fatness. It's a juicy role. It's a big role. This is a huge show. This is my chance. What am I willing to do to keep that role? And his answer is going to be different than Maria's because she's younger than him too by, it was about, I forget, it's like a decade or something. So she's in, when they meet, she's in her 20s. By the time the filming ends, she's in her mid 30s. But she's in her 20s. She has like a safety net back in Sweden. And for him, this is a much more fraught issue. So that was sort of all that was involved in some of their conflicts.
Definitely. We are getting close to our Q&A time, so I just wanted to make sure everyone had a chance to put their questions in the Q&A box. And we will start that in just a few minutes. I have one more question for you before we get to that Q&A.
Okay.
Actually, I have a few more, but I'm trying to decide. Let's be honest. So let's start with, what are you reading right now? What's on your radar? What are you looking out and thinking like, this looks fun?
So for the most part, let me just sort of backtrack by giving some context. As I told Johanna Marie, I am moving on Thursday. I also have a book due in 3 days. So yes, so I am on Wednesday. Actually, my birthday's in 2 days. My book is due in 3 days. And in 4 days, I'm moving.
Maybe you're not reading a lot at this year.
There hasn't been. I've mostly been writing and then reading my own book because I need to edit a lot of words out of it. In general, my books have, in the spoiler alert series, ran a little bit long, but they're supposed to run about max 100,000. Now I will say All the Feels is like about 103,000 in the end. The book I just wrote, which is the first book in a new series, the initial draft was 121,000 words. So
I love
yay for a completed draft. But then I'm like, now I have to cut. At least I could say All the Feels was 103. So I could be like, maybe I only have to cut 14,000 words.
Right.
Like it's no more than 14,000,
17,000?
17,000, 18,000 words. And I have gotten it down to 107,000. But that still leaves me 4,000 more. I was stubborn. So I refused to cut entire scenes because I liked all my scenes. So I was trying to go through and like any excess verbiage, things that were not entirely necessary or that I didn't think were hilarious. Like the stuff that I thought was really hilarious, I did keep that because they're rom-coms. But anything else, I tried to strip it down. And it did make it better, like legitimately. I reread it and I'm like, I still have to cut more, but I reread it. I'm like, oh, this is much tighter. Like some books, it's more painful. This one, I was like, no, there's excess here to be trimmed. And so I have trimmed most of it. But that is mostly what I've been reading. There was a monster romance anthology that just came out, and I read a story in that last night because they're quick. Like they're like, 45 minutes to an hour a story. And I'm a fan of that subgenre.
So follow-up question. Can you tell us anything about this new series, or is it too soon?
I can tell you. It's all going to be set in a fictional town, sort of in southeastern Maryland. I grew up till I was 9 in the St. Mary's County area, so on the water, Chesapeake Bay. It's called Harlot's Bay because it was settled by perfect. It was settled by a couple sort of runaway women, and then more sort of women sort of come in, and they have a bad reputation, and so at some point they're called Harlot's Bay, and it's still a town where a lot of people, particularly women who have burned down their lives, sort of come to start over.
Yeah.
And the female main character is named Athena, and she was engaged to a man named Johnny. And a month before the wedding, his older brother convinced him to break the engagement. Unfortunately, she had already left her job because she was a teacher and it was the summer. So she left her job and sold her condo and sold all her furniture. And really, all she has left, she spent all her savings on buying, there's row houses. She bought the row house that was attached to her fiance's row house. It was a spite house. So it's a 10-foot wide spite house. If you don't know what a spite house is, look up Spite House Boston. She bought this so that he could tear down the wall in the middle and make a larger home, which he had wanted.
Yeah.
But that's now basically all she owns. So she moves into this 10-foot wide spite house with her ex-fiance through one wall. And then there's a 4-foot wide alleyway on the other side of her. And then that's where his older brother lives, Matthew, the one who convinced him to dump her. And the story is between her and Matthew. So it is the older brother who convinced his younger brother to leave her. And she obviously is not like super thrilled with him. And there are reasons, but so yes, so that is the story, is with the two of them. So it's a juicy story to write. It's a super I think it's very funny, but it's also a very emotional story. Part of what I want to do about Athena is she is someone who is she comes in like not doing super well. Like everything, all this has gone wrong, and she's depressed, and not just sad, depressed. And so part of the thing with her is sort of working through figuring out, for her being willing to acknowledge I am depressed and then do something about it. Even though she's quite funny and so forth. And then, there's a lot of complications with Matthew and his brother because he broke up the engagement. So like for him to be, well, now I want to be with her. Right. So yeah, so it gets complicated and juicy. And I think I really love the book. I mean, we'll see what my editor says in 3 days. Turn it in. But I really love the book.
Making time for this when you're on a deadline, because wow. B, I really love I don't know how she's gonna fix this kind of romance setup. Mm-hmm. So I'm very excited because I don't know how you're gonna okay, we have some questions from our audience. I'm gonna open those up. So from Jamie, Olivia, since discovering fan fiction, have you written any? And if so, what fandoms was it for?
I have not, and I mean this sincerely, I have not written fan fiction. I spent about 1.5 years doing nothing but reading fan fiction, but writing it is a different skill set, because even if you're a comfortable writer, and it's what I do for a living, but it is different to sort of be in the point of view of your own character that you created versus trying to sort of immerse yourself in someone else's character and be able to write from their perspective and their personality and their experiences. And then to potentially, depending on whether it's sort of canon adjacent or not, whether you want to set it in a post-apocalyptic, featuring zombies or a Regency house party or a bakery. All of these things you sort of depending, again, if you're doing sort of canon compliant or whatever, then you can sort of use the setting too and so forth. But if you're doing other things, if you're doing AUs, then, there's a lot of skill. There is a lot of care, because the people who write fan fiction, most of them care a lot about getting the characters right and the dynamic right. And at some point I had to decide whether that was something I was willing to devote the time to get good at. And the answer was I would just rather read it. And also I want to keep it as a hobby, like reading it, because it changes when you start doing something like as a something that I would be able to judge. Like,
Yeah.
oh, how many kudos did I get? How many comments did I get? Was that as good as it could have been? I didn't want to take another aspect of my life. Like, reading is no longer as uncomplicated as it used to be once you start writing for a living. And I didn't want to do that for fan fiction too. I wanted to keep it just purely an escape rather than something that I had to sort of achieve in.
Yeah. I understand that.
Yeah.
From Abby, they asked, what did you think, or were you afraid was your big weakness when you started writing novels? And what did you do to help overcome it? Do you still feel weak in that aspect of writing?
I had many weaknesses. Depending on who you talk to, they might tell you that I have not fully taken care of them. I will say that I have deliberately tried to address those weaknesses over time. Like the first big weakness was the lack of plot. And so I found for all the rest of my books, I go ahead and write, it's not an outline, but I write basically a basic summary of what's going to happen in the book to make sure that something happens in the book other than conversation and sex and introspection, which are like my three like go-tos.
Yes.
One of the other weaknesses that I really had to work on, and I think I have gotten a lot better at it, is description. Some authors, when they write, can see the scene that they're writing sort of like you would see it on a movie screen. So like full color, there's surroundings, everything around them, right? If people are having a conversation in my head, they're like in a formless void. Like there is nothing I have to create. I have to think about it and sort of make sure that I'm describing things so that they're not just in, again, a formless void. And the way I went about fixing that was, it's not published, maybe someday if I revise it a lot. I wrote a futuristic Gothic. So it's set like it's like a sci-fi, like set in the future, different planet, but it is a Gothic. And the thing about Gothic romances is that a lot of it's about atmosphere, right? It's usually the female main character, like often in a mansion or whatever, going through and finding stuff like spooky things happening, but they're isolated, right? So a lot of what's happening is all about description and atmosphere. So I put myself in a position where I was telling a story where I would be forced to practice description, like for an entire book. And that is what I also worked on metaphorical language, which was also a weakness of mine, was metaphorical language. So for that book, those were my goals, was description, metaphorical language. And I think that I think I'm better. I mean, I'm sure I still have plenty of weaknesses, but I think my most glaring weaknesses, I have done my best to sort of address. But you may disagree with that, and feel free to disagree with that. But the things that I found most problematic in my own writing, I've tried to fix as best I can.
I see. Now you said there's a Gothic romance out here hidden in the void somewhere. Can I just throw in my vote that one day we yeah. Just like I want to read Olivia Dade's Gothic sci-fi romance. Oh my god. Oh my god. But you do with it what you will, but I'm just saying, I want to read it if no one else does.
I appreciate that.
Our next question is from Anonymous. What newer romance novels or writers have you enjoyed? Spoiler alert, was my first romance book, and I've not really known how to branch out beyond the spoiler alert series.
So I could talk to you about, there's a couple of different ways I can go about this. And maybe they can even say in the Q&A, which you want me to do, is I can talk about people who like my books often like these other authors and other books, or I can talk about what I myself am currently sort of newer books that I'm into and currently reading, but I don't know which one is more useful to you, because I can talk to you about, maybe I talk about people who like my books often love Talia Hibbert, like the Brown Sisters trilogy in particular. So Get a
Yeah.
Life, Chloe Brown, that
Mhm.
entire series is
Yeah.
fantastic. Talia Hibbert is amazing. And people who read my books often are huge fans of Talia Hibbert. So that would be always my number one, like other suggestion. Also, if you like having sort of fat characters, she also does that. Another series that people often read when they read my series as well is the sort of Renaissance Fair series by Jen DeLuca. The first one is Well Met, and the whole series is set like in the Ren Fair sort of world, like a modern Ren Fair, like
Yeah.
modern. It's not set in the Renaissance; it's set in modern times. Um,
Contemporary.
yeah, and it's sort of set in that same universe. So those are both series that I think have a lot of similar appeal to them. If you like nerdy stuff, which I do, Kathy Yardley, Yardley, she did a whole earlier series which was set around like fandom stuff, and then she has these recent series which are through yeah, you can, I think they're through Amazon only, but there's one like Gouda Friends. So there's like a cheese theme. Anyway, but she's awesome. And those are kind of a little nerdy too. So those are fun to read.
Yeah.
I hope
Thank
that
you.
was that okay? I hope that was okay. Let me see.
Let's find out.
Yes. Okay, good. Good, good.
Yeah.
Oh, the Ren Fair series, Megan, the first one is called Well Met, Wellmet. The author's name is Jen DeLuca, Jendeluca. Yep.
I am taking notes personally because you are hit the nail on the head. I am a huge Holly Hibbert fan as well.
See?
So I'll be picking these others. We have two more questions. We have time for just two more questions.
Okay.
So our next question, also by anonymous, is how do you write such funny jokes, dialogue, and jokes and dialogue for your books? Do you have books or TV shows that you take inspiration from?
So, I think all authors have certain things that come more naturally to them. Just like description and metaphorical language was not sort of naturally my thing, it was something I had to work on. Even my earliest books, which are not my best books, the one thing that was there from the beginning, two things, was sex, which I think I'm happy with the sexual content in my books, but it was humor. So that is something that was not really something I had to work on. Where my humor actually came from, I mean, I think some of it, I have a real weakness for farce. And some of that is The Simpsons. I watched growing up, back when, movies many years ago. And Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and The Far Side. And yeah, so I think that's where a lot of my humor sort of, you know, took hold. But that's something that sort of, and when I was reading romance, probably the author whose humor I most loved was Jennifer Cruzy. Uh, Her humor really appealed to me. Like my books are not like hers, but her humor, particularly there's an old it was a Harlequin Temptation again. It's called Getting Rid of Bradley. I think she republished it as, I thought that book was, I know that her most beloved book is Bet Me.
Yes.
I don't love the fat rep in Bet Me.
Yeah.
So the one that is most beloved to me is actually Getting Rid of Bradley, which I think is hilarious.
Yeah.
So yeah.
One more question. Let's see. Oh, actually, I think that was the last one. Yay!
Yay.
We got Megan's on the title of that series by Jim Luca. But oh my gosh, Olivia Day, thank you so much for having this time with us. It has been so fun. where can we find out more? Be on the alert for that next series that we're super excited about. Where can we find out more?
On social media, I'm only on Twitter. So that is at Olivia Writes. So all one word, Olivia, Writes. My website is the best place to go for, to see what's happening. And that's just oliviadade.com. There's also from my website and also from Twitter, there are links to my newsletter. In theory, we should be sending them out. We're told to send them out at least once a month. I generally only send them out either when I have a new release or a sale, or if there's something like really, like if there's something big happening, then I'll send one out. But there are times I go months between, which is not what I'm supposed to be doing, but it is the way it is. So if you want to sign up for the Hussy Herald, which is what I call it, then that's where to do that. And I will always obviously send one out when I have a new book out. Can I also tell people about the no matter where you get the book, if you go to my homepage, if you register your pre-order, you can get a dust jacket. Like the only place where you can get the physical dust jacket is Love Sweet Arrow. I'm sorry. But if they get it Midtown Reader, then you can register and get the digital version of the dust jacket and a bonus story that I'm writing for Kara and Summer from the Spoiler Alert series, because I always intended them to be a couple. So they play Dido and Lavinia, so they're Aeneas's two lady loves, except they're like, anyway, in real life, not into it. They're into each other. So that is something that you can get along with the digital dust jacket if you register either on, depending on what you did, where you ordered it from, either Avon's landing page or mine. So that's something that you might well look at if you pre-order, because the digital dust jacket, it's like an old school historical romance cover. It is like there's a non-zero amount of tasteful nudity, and it's gender flipped from the traditional covers. And it has Marie Ann Peter. It is, and Lenny Kaufman, who's my normal cover artist, did the art.
Yes.
I wrote new descriptions that make it sound like an 80s romance. And I shot a new author photo, like 80s author photo. It's
so y'all know what I'm doing once this is done. But you can definitely go to midtownreader.com to pre-order, and go to oliviadade.com to get that dust jacket, because I need it. I think y'all need it too. So
it is beautiful, and it is also hilarious. So both of those things together, it's really cool.
Yay, I'm so excited. Thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for coming out tonight, coming out online. I know that's an event, that's like my event ending line. But thank y'all for being on here with us, and we look forward to seeing you on October 23rd at the next Not Your Mother's Romance Book Club.
Thank you for asking me to take part in this, Johanna Marie, and thank you to everyone who is listening. I hope all is well in your corner of the world, wherever you are.
Have a good night.
Take care.
You too.